Okay, so we'll make a start. As Brian mentioned, my name is Lindsay Dunn and I work for the national talent team within Swim England. So I've obviously come up here today to have a look at the regional championships, mainly to sort of touch base with some coaches, see some swimming obviously, and then we want to make the opportunity to parents to also be able to access us as a team periodically throughout the year. So what I will start by saying is that we are going to deliver a presentation to you. And I'll talk through in a second what we're going to be discussing in that presentation. So, but that's take probably about 45 to 50 minutes. If we can hold any questions to the end, and I'm happy to take questions as a group, and also obviously if you've got any more confidential or personal questions you want to answer, I'll be here as long as you need me to be after that. So we'll make the most of me being here today, and please don't be afraid to come and ask any questions, and they will be in confidence if that's necessary as well. Obviously, as Barry's mentioned, we are recording the session. We will also make sure that we put the presentation up online as a PDF format, so again you can share this with other people. The link can be shared back on club websites and things, so we kind of spread the word about that. I'll pass over to Chris and get him to introduce himself first of all. He's going to be talking a little bit towards the end of the session about the regional development programme.
Yes, my name's Chris Dove, currently head coach at Richmond Dales. I've been selected to run as the head lead on the regional programme for the 12-year-olds this year. Like Lindsay said, I'll go into more detail later on in the presentation of when the dates are and the selection and everything later on.
So just to talk a little bit to start with about the talent team, because I'm mindful that maybe some of you haven't been involved in the sport for that long, others of you probably have, but you may or may not be aware of what the talent team do within Swim England. So I'm one of a team of 5 people that work nationally. So there's myself and someone called Mike Parker. We're both national talent officers. We basically cover the whole country now, kind of between us. We then have a head of talent whose name is Grant Robbins, and then we have a sports science manager, Diane Elliott, and a coach development lead, Joanna Jones. So we're a team of 5 people. We do cover quite an expanse of area. We obviously work really closely with a lot of our regional teams, so our club development teams nationally, where there's a member of staff allocated per region, and also the regional staff that are employed by the region, who certainly support the work that we do and the work that the club development team do. In terms of our main areas of influence and what we do as a team, the first thing is we do spend quite a bit of time hopefully trying to make impact within what we call our daily training environments or our clubs. Okay? In the main, our team tends to focus its I suppose support to our more performance-minded programmes. Okay? We are a small team, and our talent pathway is about getting people to the end of that pathway and ultimately hopefully transitioning them into the British Swimming World Class programme. Okay? Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we do work really closely with the regional staff and also the club development team to try and develop these networks around some of our performance programmes where athletes can successfully transition where necessary through some of those different environments. So our focus tends to be with the bigger clubs and the more performance-minded programmes, but there's a lot of linkages within the different teams in Swim England. The second thing, certainly that we're taking a bit more responsibility for, if you like, moving forwards, is the domestic competition programme. So again, those of you that were involved in the sport going back to 2015, you'll be aware that there was quite a lot of changes to the way we ran competitions in this country. So one of our roles as a talent team is to try and work with our regions, our counties, and also make sure that the national competitions that we directly run and manage are good opportunities for our athletes to be involved with. Okay? Still a bit of work on that. There was some big changes going back 4 years ago, and things are still a work in progress. Okay? And then the third thing that we're obviously very heavily involved with and responsible for is the management of our development programme pathway. So by that I mean that we run a series of camps and competition opportunities, some that we directly manage, fund and organise as the Swim England talent team, and others that we support and are delivered by our regions and our counties. Okay? So if I flick over to a slightly bigger diagram of what we saw earlier, in terms of the development programme pathway, the Podium programme, Podium Potential and Podium, are the two programmes that are funded and managed by British Swimming. Alright, so our aim as Swim England Talent is to try and transition as many of our swimmers into those programmes as possible. All right, so those programmes are populated by swimmers from Scotland, England and Wales. All right, so we obviously want to keep a high percentage of those year in, year out coming from the England talent pathway. Everything beneath that, so if we go from the Swim England International Competition all the way down to our National Development Programme and our new Swim England Performance Squad, they're the 4 levels of the pathway that our team directly manage. Okay? So we start with National Development Programme for 13 and 14-year-olds. We run 3 one-day camps every year between September and December, and we do them at 6 locations across England. We then have our national event camps, which we run typically mid-December time, usually off the back of the short course English Championships in December. And mainly we have 2 locations for those. This year it will be Sheffield and Millfield, and they're for 15 and 16-year-olds. And at that point we start to run camps that are a bit more event specific. Okay? Then we have our international competition squad this will become our England junior squad. Last year we took them to Nice, so we went away, we took them to a competition, and we basically threw a lot of coaching support and sports science and sports medicine support around those 20 athletes. And then we've got another 20 that are going to Mallorca in a few weeks' time for the Best Festival. And there's going to be a series of open water swimmers and distance swimmers. So we've kind of got 2 programmes also running at this international competition level. And then we also have a Swim England Performance Squad. So typically what we were finding as the British swimming numbers in podium and podium potential were dropping, we were struggling with that transitional space between the top of our pathway and the swimmers that were ready to go into the world-class programmes. So we developed a new performance squad last year, which again, there'll be a new intake for this October, and that programme runs throughout the course of a year, and we typically take around 20 athletes on that programme. And that age group, to be honest, can span pretty widely. If we have some really early developing athletes, we probably look to take them from as early as 15, but typically they've been 17, 18, 19-year-olds that have populated that programme last year. Okay? Then obviously we work really closely with the regions, and they run a regional development programme, a 3 one-day programme every year, which Chris will talk in a lot more detail about later on, and that's specifically for our 12-year-olds. A very, very similar format to our national development programme, but it runs at different times of the year for different age groups, and it has a slightly different kind of camp syllabus to it, if you like. And then we also work with each of our counties. So we have 33 counties across England, and this has been the first year where every county is now delivering a development programme, which is brilliant. We hope to have achieved that by the end of 2021. We achieved that in January 2019, so we're really, really pleased with that. And that's a programme for our 11-year-olds, but again, it runs a very similar format to the regional and the national development programme, just a lower age band, different times of the year, and slightly different content again. So some of you may have previously had involvement in the county development programme because Yorkshire and NMD have run those programmes for the past 2 years, so some of you may be aware of those. But certainly moving forwards, we've got a much better platform to build that experience for our athletes from. Okay? Now, we do have a big talent brochure which talks about each of these levels in a lot more detail. That's currently been rewritten for this year. But what we'll do, when we put the actual documentation of the presentation online, I will put last year's version of the talent brochure on there. Nothing massively wholesale has changed for this year. There's just a few tweaks with some selection policies and some numbers, okay? So you'll get a really good flavour for what we do in a bit more detail if you're interested in knowing about that, okay? So what we're going to talk about today, specifically, are a few key areas of work that we're doing. So first of all is the Optimal Athlete Development Framework. So just out of interest, has anybody heard of that framework yet? Okay, so it's only really been something that we've started talking about over the last few months in terms of going into the public domain. But it's basically a framework that's been developed by British Swimming and the Home Nations, which helps us to look at what characteristics we feel athletes would need to have in their toolbox to be able to ultimately be successful on the world international stage in the future. Okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is and where to find more information for that. And that is a holistic framework, so it doesn't just talk about physical characteristics, it also talks about psychological characteristics. So it is more holistic, and it also splits conversations into those about the person, the athlete, and also the performer. So 3 areas that we'll look at there. The next one, which I'll give a bit of a broad brush across, is something called the Youth Physical Development Model. So again, within our OADF, we will have conversations about some psychological characteristics, some physical characteristics, and we will use bits of research and bits of information that we can pass out into the swimming community. So in terms of that physical trainability area, that's one of the models that we'll talk to you about and raise some awareness of today, particularly because, and very interesting, there's been a tweet this morning of this exact same topic area, most of the conversations or questions that I get from parents is how much training should my child be doing at their particular age, what should it look like, and that is a really, really difficult question to ask because you need to know a lot about the individual, how long they've been in the sport for, what's their biological age, how much training have they been used to, what are they like technically. So there's so much stuff that really should be involved in making that decision that I couldn't give you a number that should be applied to every 12-year-old swimmer across the region, and that would be ridiculous for anybody to even suggest that could happen, I think. But we'll talk about some kind of parameters and frameworks that will be of interest to you, hopefully. And then I'll pass over to Chris, and he'll talk, as I mentioned earlier, about the regional development programme and what that entails specifically for the 12-year-olds. That'll just be the last kind of 10 minutes or so. Okay? So a couple of videos to start you off about the OADF.
Welcome to this, the second video in our series to support the Optimal Athlete Development Framework. This is a simple guide to our new Optimal Athlete Development Framework, a project which has been launched by British Swimming alongside Swim England, Scottish Swimming and Swim Wales. So what is the OADF? The framework describes a set of characteristics, attributes and principles that we believe will help to promote the optimal development of future generations of swimmers in Britain. So, in putting the project together, who was involved? We collated the opinions of 60 coaches and support staff working for British Swimming, the 3 home nations and our national centres, alongside a number of influential club coaches and a small number of our most successful international swimmers. So what exactly is it? The OADF is a resource for all coaches working in Britain. It sets out the characteristics and attributes of the Great British Swimmer, along with a wider group of athletes who display future performance potential. To ensure the project retained a holistic perspective, we considered nearly 500 pieces of feedback and categorised these under 3 broad headings: the characteristics and attributes as a person, as an athlete, and as a performer. You can find out more about this project by visiting www.offtheblocks.info and watch out for more videos in this series coming soon.
Can I just quickly ask if any of you got a login for Off the Box? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so Off the Box is an online platform. It was set up a number of years ago. Initially, to be honest, it was set up with a lot more technical information geared towards coaches. So specifically, it had a lot of information around coaching starts and turns, because that was felt that we weren't maybe doing as good a job as we needed to in this country of coaching those skills. So that's kind of where it started off from. It's now become a much more expansive online portal, and certainly over the past year or two, there's been a lot of information gone there around things like lifestyle management, nutrition. So it's not really just an online resource for coaches, it's great for parents too. So I would encourage you to try and get on that platform. All you need to do is basically send a request for a username and a login. So if you type www.offtheblocks.info, you'll be able to go through that process. But a really, really great resource. And Off the Blocks, in effect, will become a bit of the shop window for that portal in the future. Okay, second video.
Welcome to this, the second video in our series to support the Optimal Athlete Development Framework project. In this video, we will explain the philosophical approach we took in designing the framework, how we intend to resource the framework, and where supporting resources can be found. At the heart of this project is the belief that our coaches and practitioners should be empowered to be autonomous and creative. We have not designed a rigid or prescriptive curriculum. The road to success can often be bumpy and non-linear, and our project reflects this. We are asking our coaching and support team to exercise their professional expertise and judgment in guiding and developing their athletes along a journey towards the ultimate destination of Olympic success. Our philosophy is to outline a broad framework of essential characteristics that we feel athletes will need to challenge for world-level podium success in 2024 and beyond. For the younger group, we have defined some different attributes for those swimmers who we believe can make the step towards the podium a little further into the future. When designing the project, we used the analogy of a shop window and a warehouse. The framework documents form our shop window, and our Off the Blocks portal forms the warehouse. The warehouse has been constantly updated with resources that our community can use to effectively implement the framework. British Swimming will be working with the home nations to ensure our warehouse is well stocked. We have created a specific area within Off the Blocks to house the framework and to be the home to all associated resources. Resources will be continually added over time to ensure the long-term future for the project. So that completes the second video in this series. Keep an eye out for our next video, where we will introduce to you the ACCESS acronym. You can find the next video and all other supporting resources at www.offtheblocks.info.
Now, we don't quite have the third video ready yet. That is in production at the moment. So I am going to talk you now through ACCESS, what I mean by ACCESS. In essence, if you reflect back to the first slide that I gave you about, I suppose, the impact or desired impact of our team around things like our daily training environment, the competition pathway, and our development program pathway. Ultimately, what we want all of those environments to do is live and breathe ACCESS. Okay? So ACCESS basically means that they're athlete-centred. So by athlete-centred, fundamentally what we mean is that the athlete is always at the heart of every decision that we make. Okay, so sometimes that's about putting the needs of an athlete in front of the needs of a club or a squad. Sometimes it's just about what actually does this particular athlete need from me as a coach or from this environment at this particular point in their journey. Okay, so it's about making sure that everything is about what is best for that individual within the context of the different environments that they experience. Second one is about being coach-led. So again, what we're not saying is that our committees aren't extremely important, because they are, but what we need our coaches to do in our clubs is to set the culture and be the architects of those environments, all right? They're the people that are employed to shape what's done in those programs, how those programs deliver to the young athletes that are in them, and we need the coaches to have that opportunity to be a little bit autonomous and creative with how they do that. The committees obviously have a massive role to play in check and challenging some of that, whether it's financial sustainability, whether it's around things like safeguarding and welfare, but ultimately we need coaches to be able to drive our club programs, okay, and really lead them from the front. The next next one is culturally defined. So we talk a lot in British Swimming and Swim England about something called Kaizen. So Kaizen is a Sino-Japanese term. Anybody know what it means? Nobody been swatting up on their Sino-Japanese recently? No? So what it means basically is continual improvement. So it just talks about having a philosophy that even if you've done particularly well at a given point in time, that doesn't mean that you rest on your laurels, that you continue to look for ways to be better, all right? And certainly we would want that from our clubs as much as we want that from the next team that goes to the Tokyo Olympics. They did a great job in Rio, but ultimately British Swimming aren't going to sit back and go, well, that was great, let's just carry on with the status quo, because all the other nations around the world will move things on, and we have to be ahead of that game. Also, what it means for us, particularly within the pathway, is that specifically we have to try and get our athletes to be able to perform when it matters. Okay? So, unfortunately, swimming is quite a brutal sport. If you're going to go to the Olympics, it's once every 4 years, and if you don't perform on that day, that's it for another 4 years. All right? It's a really, really harsh sport. As you filter that down the pathway, for many swimmers, it's once a year. It's once a year where they'll get their biggest competition, whether it's here at the regions, whether it's at the national championships. The good thing for those guys is they've got a long time left in the sport. But they still need to develop the ability to go to a competition when the pressure is on and still produce at their best. Okay? So it's about how do we help them to do that and how do we support that process. Next one is about it being expert informed. So more and more now, as a governing body, certainly across all the home nations and British Swimming, we're really involving our expert nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches, psychologists, lifestyle management people, biomechanists, all those people that can come in who are at the forefront of knowledge in those areas and inform what we do as a governing body. Again, whether it's in the clubs, whether it's in our pathway, they help to inform us with that. And they not only inform us on what's best to talk about with our athletes and our parents and our coaches, but they also come and deliver it. So they're science supporting, they're coming to actually deliver some of this information to us. So just while we're kind of talking about expert informed and science supported, 2 weeks from now, Andy Shepherd's coming in to deliver about nutrition. So there's another opportunity for you to hear from one of our consultants within Swim England. He's coming in and he'll be available to you guys to listen to, because we feel that actually parents often ask again, they want more information about nutrition, they want to be able to have a conversation or ask a question to one of those people that's in the know, particularly when it's relevant to swimming. So please make the most of that opportunity. And then the last one is about being system aligned. So hopefully when I showed you that pathway earlier, it does talk about how we work with British Swimming and how we also work down the pathway with the regions and the county programmes, so that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. And ultimately OADF, we're hoping, will become the backbone and the framework. So I would hope that at some point over the next few months, your coaches are having conversations with you in your home programmes about OADF. And some of the language that's in that model becomes more and more familiar to you over time. Now, we're specifically, within the pathway and with the work that we do, going to talk a lot more about the future performance potential aspect of that framework and not so much the Great British Swimmer. So on our development pathway programme, maybe with our performance squad, yes, we might talk a little bit more about the Great British Swimmer characteristics, but the rest of the time, we will be talking about future performance potential. Okay? So specifically within our camp programmes, certainly up until the end of phase 2, so our national event camps, we'll be looking at these characteristics here. So when you go onto Off the Blocks, you can actually find an interactive PDF document, and when you click on each of these characteristics, it opens up and it gives you a bit more of an explanation about what we mean by enjoys the journey or is resilient and robust. So have a little look at that. Because a big part of this, particularly in this area over here, is massively influenced by the way these young people are being brought up, by the influence that you have as their parents and guardians, okay? So we will still be encouraging our coaching staff to talk about the importance of coaching the person as well as the athlete, but I hope that it makes sense for you as parents to understand this framework as well, because we want you guys to be thinking about some of these things that relate to the person and where you can help support your young child to develop their enjoyment of the journey, their resilience and robustness, their independence. Okay? I'll give you an example. On our national event camp last year before Christmas, we had a psychologist called Hannah Stoyle, and she was on the camp with us, and she tasked the coaches on the day to try and kind of commend the swimmers, praise the swimmers, for things that they did well as a person. So coaches actually found that to start with probably a little bit of a challenge, because normally they're used to giving positive feedback around great turn, excellent stroke efficiency, and she challenged them and said, actually, I want you today to talk to them about what they've done as a person, whether it was help somebody else out in the lane, you know, got the equipment ready before the session, things that they've done that had a positive impact on other people, but not really relating to them as an athlete. Because what she says she finds is that a lot of athletes that come to her for support, usually around the age of 15, 16, struggle with self-esteem. And a big part of that is that when they're swimming perhaps plateaus or takes a bit of a downturn for a period of time, they think that if they're not swimming very well, they're a bad person. All right? And they kind of make the links between the two things. So it is really important that our coaches talk about supporting the person, the athlete, and the performer. But certainly as parents, there is a really important role for you to play within that kind of support triangle, you, the coach, and your young child as well. Okay? So I would encourage you just to go away and have a little look at that particular part of the framework, but also to think about what you do in terms of how do I make my child enjoy the journey? How do I make them enjoy race day? What can I do that makes them enjoy it a bit more? All right? What can I do as a parent? What can I do to make them independent? And obviously independence is really relevant to their age and stage of development. What we know is that what we expect from an 11-year-old demonstrating some level of independence is a lot different to a 17, 18-year-old. But there's a part that we can all play in making this happen. Okay? So obviously this is a holistic framework, and as I mentioned at the start, we will be talking about different aspects of this framework and using other models to bring physical elements to life, psychological elements to life. And what we're going to talk about today is the youth physical development model. Okay? So I will attach the full kind of article that goes with this. What I personally love about this particular paper is it's really, really user-friendly. So it's a piece of research that has a lot of really good practical application and is really easy, I think, to understand in layman's terms. So a great piece of information to pick up and give you a bit of a reference point. Particularly, I think, if you wanted to go and speak to your coach about, you know, why does my child's training look like this compared to maybe other people of their kind of age or level of performance. Some of these things are probably some of the things that you might want to talk about, and this could be a model that you would refer back to hopefully have a more productive conversation. So there are two versions of it. It's very PC in that there's a version for females, which is pink, and a version for males, which is blue. Okay, so that's a great place to start. There isn't a lot of difference really between the two models. One really key difference is that most things tend to happen, particularly when we talk about the onset of adolescence and something called peak height velocity. That all tends to happen a couple of years later. So if you look at the chronological age line across the top, you'll see that most of those things start to kick in a couple of years later for the boys than they do for the girls. Okay? So that's really the only difference. It is a model, so right from the outset, it's worth just acknowledging that there will be outliers to this. There will be people that don't hit their adolescent spurt until they're maybe a little bit older, right? They might some hit it a little bit younger, but this is a general model that can be applied to lots of different sports, okay? So, if I just talk through how we, I suppose, kind of interpret it. First thing to note is the shading. So, where it's light pink or light blue, that just basically means pre-adolescence. When it's dark pink and dark blue, it's what happens post-adolescence. Okay, so post that kind of sexual maturity taking place. Down the side, obviously, we've got chronological age across the top, which is self-explanatory. The great thing again about this model is it talks about 2-year-olds all the way up to adulthood. Right, so it doesn't just take that snapshot of time when they're involved in swimming or sport per se. it talks about the whole picture. Then it has age periods, so again, typically we find that early childhood between 2 to 4 years, middle childhood 5 to 9 years, and so on. So again, some generalisations there of different age periods. Mapped against that, what we've then got is typical growth rates in those periods. So typically, in early childhood, there'll be rapid growth. In middle childhood, there'll be steady growth. At the point where you have this adolescent spurt, there'll be, again, some rapid growth rate, and probably their fastest rate of growth that they'll ever experience. All right, so they might be growing at different other times in their life, but that'll be the point at which they're growing at the fastest rate. Probably at the point where, particularly if you've got boys, your grocery bill will start to hike up a little bit. But certainly that's what we call peak height velocity, so the point at which they're growing at the fastest rate in terms of their height. And then what we see typically 16, 17 and onwards is a bit of a decline in growth rate. So again, important to note that they don't stop growing per se. In some cases they might do, but if they are continuing to grow, it's just at a slower rate than it was in the adolescent spurt. Okay? If we move then down, so training adaptations, I'm not going to go into too much detail around that, but typically what we have is when they're younger, their brain obviously has to start making what we call neural connections with their muscles. So the brain needs to communicate with the muscles to make sure that they can perform movement effectively in its most simplest form. And when they get a little bit older, those lovely hormones kick in and start to have a bit of an impact too. Okay? Now, when we look then at all the different physical qualities, before I go into what each of them mean, typically, where you have something that's in large font and bold, why do you think it's represented in that way on this chart? Yeah, so it's important and it's most trainable, typically at that period in their development. All right, so it's really important. So you'll see, I think, what's really important to mention to start with is that everything is there all the time. So all of those things should be worked on at all times. But the amount of time you spend on them, their relative importance, how trainable they are, that changes across that development pathway. So is everybody kind of happy with that interpretation? And that's why I love it. I think it's really simple, but it gives you some really clear guidance. So in terms of physical qualities, first one is what we call fundamental movement skills. So fundamental movement skills, what do we know about fundamental movement skills? What are they? Do we know what they are? So things like kicking, throwing, catching, right? So just basic experience of kind of sport, not even in any structured sport or play in its earliest form. And also things that will develop things like typically balance, coordination, all of those locomotor skills that you want them to develop when they're young. But often happens through not really doing anything particularly structured. It might just be playing in the garden or in the park. So fundamental movement skills, really important, particularly through early and middle childhood, but still remains important through adolescence and into adulthood. Right? So it's still there as something that needs to be worked upon. And what we know is that typically if an athlete has developed some of those neural pathways and is well coordinated, can balance effectively, has good locomotor skills, that's transferred into the sport-specific skills. So when they start to learn starts and turns and try to coordinate their limbs and their breathing and everything when they come to swim, they can often execute those sport-specific skills a lot better. All right, so actually that kind of precursory exposure to just doing lots of different sports is a really, really positive thing. And as a governing body, we're not encouraging people to focus solely on swimming early. Right? What we know, typically from the last 2 Olympic Games, is that the age of our Olympic medalists is getting older. That's the trend at the moment. All right, so we're typically seeing people in their early to mid-20s picking up those medals. So we have the challenge of having athletes in our sport from the outset because they learn to swim, and we've got to keep them in the sport. So actually spending time doing other sports where there's skills that can cross over and benefit is really, really important. And I wouldn't encourage people to be just focused on swimming until they're probably 13, 14 and onwards. And that even then that will be relative to their age and stage development, their biological age, their experience in the sport, whether they're an early maturing or late maturing. Okay? Next we've got mobility. So mobility is never particularly big and bold in any area, all right? a bit frustrating for coaches is that it's most trainable in the period of time when they're probably learned to swim, or before they get to our clubs in some cases. So we do still need to work on it, because in a lot of cases when we bring athletes to our camps, our development programme activities, we have people that are restricted in range of movement. So the best coach in the world can deliver a session on streamlining or stroke technique. If the athlete physically can't get into that position, they need to do some stuff on dry land that help to release some of those physical restrictions. So they need to have enough mobility and a range of movement to be able to get into the swimming specific positions. All right, so we need to keep working on that throughout. And that's why it is really, really important that we engage in things like pre-pool and post-pool around our sessions. We engage ourselves in land training, because a lot of this stuff needs to be done away from the pool. The next one's agility. So by agility, we just mean that an athlete's able to change direction, maintain speed. So probably what's the best example in a swimming race where you see somebody being agile? Yeah, turns. Right? Where they're going in one direction, having to change quickly and move, push off in the other direction, keep their speed. And typically, going back probably 5 or 6 years ago, what British Swimming found was that a lot of our athletes were great in what we called the free swimming phase, the middle 40 metres of the race. But in terms of maybe starts and particularly turns, we were losing out a lot against some of the other nations in the world. So it has been a big area of focus, and it is something that we need our coaching community to continue to work on. All right? Bill Finesse, the head coach of British Swimming, has a great quote, and he says it's not a swimming race, it's a start race, a swimming race, a turn race, a swimming race, and a finish race. All of those things contribute to the success of the race. You can't just be a good swimmer. You have to be a good starter, a good turner, and a good finisher as well. I think you couldn't make it any better. In terms of speed, so what we know is speed is most trainable in middle childhood, adolescence. What we would advocate from a governing body point of view is that we have athletes that are technically effective and efficient in the way that they move, and then you can add the speed onto it. Okay? It isn't enough for a swimmer to be able to swim with great technique at slow speeds. Right? The skill is to be able to hold that together when they swim fast. One of the things I say to my kids is like, 50% of the job you're going to do today is about trying to swim fast, but I want you to look good while you're doing it. All right? So we've kind of got to get those two things to come together. Sometimes do all this great work in training and they dive in and they're next to people and that just kind of goes out the window a little bit. So we need the two things to come together. So efficiency means ultimately we'll get more speed on that athlete once they're efficient. Power is also quite an interesting one, because if you look back at some of the old kind of long-term athlete development models that people would refer to and still do, because a lot of that information is still extremely relevant and useful, particularly for our coaches, there wasn't a lot of mention about power. And for me, again, if I'm looking at an athlete that I think maybe has potential for the future, I see them expressing power well. So that can look different. It can look like Ben Proud doing 50 free, where you've got this really, really high force output for a short period of time. You see that that's powerful. But I think you also watch Kate Ledecky swim the 800 freestyle, and she's powerful. It's just a longer expression of power over a longer period of time. But she's still powerful. You couldn't look at her and say she's not powerful, because she is. So people express power in different ways, but I think that that's a really important thing in terms of looking at people that can put their hand in the water and move forwards in it. They can work with the water. It's really important for our sport. And certainly, obviously, around things like starts and turns. Strength, what's particularly interesting, do you think, in terms of strength and the way it's represented here? Because it's the only one that looks the way it does. Yeah, so it's big and bold all the way through. Okay? Previously, I worked at Plymouth Leander before I started this job for 7 years, so I did have the pleasure of coaching Ben Proud, Ruta Malatita, and I was their S&C coach for 7 years. And what I can honestly tell you is that those athletes, their experience as children isn't sat at a PlayStation. It's being out in the park, it's climbing trees. It sounds very altruistic, but that is the reality of what they did in their childhood. So I know that they could easily, at 9, 10, climb across a monkey bar in a park. A lot of our children now that are coming through can't do some of those basic things. They can't, in its most basic form, manage their own body weight. And that's what we're talking about in terms of strength initially. If your coach came to you and went, oh, I'm going to start a strength training program with your young swimmer, you might be a bit like, not sure about that. But ultimately, being strong in its basic form is being able to manage your own body weight. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean resistance training and weight training, but we know that our best swimmers in the world are strong. They're inherently very strong people. Okay, and a lot of them have an experience in their childhood which has certainly helped them. Okay, so it's something that we need to bear in mind. Hypertrophy, again, in its simplest form, it just means that the size of the muscle increases. So in the early parts of this model, middle childhood, adolescence, a lot of that stuff is done in terms of hypertrophy by just doing bodyweight exercises. So they will get a little bit bigger just by doing things like press-ups and squats and things like any weight. Later on, you will need to apply some resistance training methods to that to help them to get a little bit bigger. All right? And then lastly, what we've got is what we call endurance. Endurance and metabolic training, but in essence it's that kind of aerobic work that they do. Okay? Now, what we know as a sport is that we are an aerobic sport. We need to do some decent work with our swimmers right the way through the journey. Right? We need that work to be good quality. Right? So we need it not to be just work and rubbish technique. All right? We need it to be, progressively loaded onto the athlete, keeping the technique sound and held together well. But actually, it's most trainable a little bit later. So when it becomes bigger font is actually at the end of adolescence and into adulthood. And we've had some very good examples, I think in British swimming over the past few years, of athletes that have kind of been on the radar, but maybe flying slightly underneath it, and they've come good at 16, 17, 18 in some of our distance events. And we do have a bit of an issue at the moment. I think we've become a nation that tend to swim 200s and down. All right, so it was great this morning to see those girls in the 800 freestyle and then backing it up in the 200 fly and boys going in for the 400 medley, because we do need, as a sport, to still keep those events alive. We do, all right, because we want to have success in all the events, not just our kind of short distance ones. So it is really trainable later on, but we need to still do that work throughout the pathway, but whilst holding great technique. So again, there's the boys' version. When you see the actual paper, obviously you'll see the difference between the two. And there's a little bit more explanation around what I've talked about today. Hopefully it's made sense of what the model tells you. And it's something, like I said, that you can maybe use when you have a conversation with the coaches. Okay, a few key messages then. First one is just around progression is an individual process. So I would always encourage you to seek to understand perhaps why your coaches have made the programme the way it is for your particular young swimmer. All right, because there'll be lots of different reasons for that. And certainly, there'll be athletes down the pool today. I saw a number of girls a little bit upset after some of their races this morning. And ultimately, that might just not be anything more than they just haven't grown for a while, and some of the other girls have, and they've maybe just moved on a little bit more than they have. And if they race against each other in 4 months' time, that might look a whole lot different. Okay? So we just need to try and help them manage and understand those processes that are going to take place. And that little diagram that you had in the ADF slides, where you have this linear route and then this topsy-turvy route, that's the reality. Having coached Ben, he didn't get onto anything to do with the talent pathway or British swimming until he was 18. If you look at someone like Siobhan Marie O'Connor, who won a silver medal in Rio in the 200 IM, she's been good right from the age of 10 and 11. She's stayed throughout that journey all the way. And then you look at someone like James Guy, who was really good at 11 and 12, because in his day you could go to nationals at 11 and 12, very successful, maybe had some challenging times in the middle of that, but stayed with it and came good the other end. Everybody's journey is really, really different, and we've got to help our young people understand that and manage that better. So give them a chance to explain that flexibility. Sometimes I've held athletes back from moving up into other squads, even if they've got a regional time or a national time, because I know that if I give them more load or more work, they're going to fall apart. And that's not in the best interest of that individual. Going back to being athlete-centred, putting the summer first, all right? With athletes that have pulled out of team competitions because they're not in a good place, they're tired, they don't need to be going to it, and it's about putting them first. But always try and seek that rather than maybe presume why the coach has done it. Seek to have that conversation to understand it better for your person. And then the last one to mention is about dry land. We probably still have a bit of a culture in swimming of, we do our swimming session and we come early to do pre-pool and we stay on late to do land training and post-pool afterwards. Ultimately for us, we want that to be part of the session. Right, so you do your pre-pool, do your swim session, you do your post-pool, that's the session. Everything in that is as important as each other. All right, because if you don't do the pre-pool and the post-pool, and you don't have enough things like mobility and stability, it will impact your potential to develop in the sport. So we can't just think that the stuff in the pool is enough, because it definitely isn't. And we know that from tracking back our best swimmers at the moment. Okay? Now, last couple of things I'm going to mention, I'll pass over to Chris. Just a reminder about Off the Blocks. So that's the link that you need to sign up to. Please go on it. Spread the word to other friends, other parents that you have within swimming about it, because it is a fantastic resource. And if at any point you feel there's something else that you would like to see or understand better as a parent, please let us know, because then we can get those experts to come in and help write some stuff for it. All right? And then the last thing I just want to mention to you is the club awards. So going back last year, the talent team and the club development team produced some new club awards. So typically, they are geared at athletes that come out of Learn to Swim, so they finish their stage 7 of the National Plan for Teaching and Swimming, or equivalent, up until the point that they probably transition into being at a regional or national championships at 13 or 14. And it outlines a kind of a syllabus of technical skill. It also talks about things like process goals, basic nutrition and hydration. So it is a syllabus that can be picked up by a club or a coach. It can be easily adapted for a big club, a medium-sized club, a small club. And you can take that technical criteria from this award and embed it into the rest of the training program that we do. So a lot of coaches over the last particularly 12 months have spoken to about that. I mention it to you guys today because I'm aware that many of you will be involved in club committees and things. All right, so this is a great opportunity to really make sure that our young athletes are getting some great technical input at the start of their swimming journey. All right, and that we don't just leave all that stuff in Learn to Swim. We continue to work on that throughout, and we get better technical swimmers coming through our talent pathway. Okay, I'll pass over to Chris.
Right, so as we said at the start, I'm here to talk about the development pathway, so it's all about the 12-year-olds in the region. So as Lindsay said at the start about the pathway through all the different stages in the British Swimming, we're mainly focusing on this one, the Regional Development Programme. So hopefully you've been a part of the county one, either in Yorkshire or in Dundee, and then we move on to the regional, which we're going to talk about today. So the regional development, it's giving swimmers in the region as much sort of advice and guidance and help resources around the area to help them on their pathway through into the later stages of the programme. This is just sort of an overview of how we run things, and as sort of a cohort from coaches down into swimmers all the way through sort of from March, where we attended the coaching conferences, to regional camps through July to December. So the regional development camp is 3 one-day camps. The dates of them this year, so the 30th of June, the 22nd of September, the 24th of November. They're all hosted at Cattrick Leisure Centre in Cattrick Garrison. Throughout the day there's 2 pool sessions, land-based, and then an educational session. It's for 18 girls, 18 boys, aged 12, like I've said previous, and it's all selected on how they've done at the regional championships. So the selection policy in a little bit more detail, just a couple of sort of key areas. Like we said, the total number of swimmers is 36, 18 male, 18 female, based on rankings post regional championships at the end of this month. We'll sit down and sort of select the athletes to go upon these. It's mainly based on the highest ranked male and female within each event. Okay, and they'll be selected to go on to these 3 one-day camps. At the camps, like I said, there'll be a pool session. It is 25-metre pool at Cattrick. I will be leading them sessions alongside 6 skills coaches, so each lane has its own coach to sort of have its specific sort of detail into each swimmer, so that swimmer has a bit more advice, rather than being sometimes at a home program where they're sharing their coach's attention with amongst 20, 30 swimmers. They have the specific attention of their skills coach. Then we bring in the experts for the dry land and the workshop, so through the dry land and pre-pool, post-pool, there's someone to come in and take that. And then through the workshops, the efficient starts, turns and finishes, I take that myself, so we go through what we look for to help the swimmers develop and progress further on. The goal setting and the eating, so the nutrition is taken by external, so we bring experts in that know around the area and guide swimmers on the basics of it, so again, later on they are able to develop these skills. So within the OADF, like Lindsay said before, we try and bring that into the camp as well, and there's always sort of a key sort of area that we look at. We try and cover all of it, but these are the key aspects that we like to look at through the 3 days, and we will be specifically on these. So coachable, where kids are able to listen to us and transfer into what we've said into their swimming. Technically excellent, so like Lindsay said, we're looking for them to be technically brilliant across all aspects, so then you can add in the speed and the endurance to everything a lot easier along the pathway. Good learner, so we put in that coachable and technical together, but more importantly enjoys the journey. So being a part of the sport, they love it because it makes it's such an easier place to be when they're happiest.
What's worth just mentioning finally is that we obviously have limited resource when it comes to the number of people that we can take on the programmes. So we know that picking people off rankings at 11 for the county programme and 12 for the regional programme and 13, 14 for the national programme doesn't necessarily mean that those athletes are going to be the ones for the future. It doesn't mean they're not going to be either, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to be. So our message back to everybody is that at that point in time, those athletes are ones that have demonstrated some potential, and we're going to take them and work with them. But they might not be the athletes that are on that pathway the year after. They may go on and off the pathway. Year in, year out, we select a new cohort, all right? But at every single point in the pathway, there is an open door policy, okay? So what's great and what's been really great for those athletes in our sport that have had a bit more of an up and down journey, but ultimately still got to be successful at the end of it, is their coaches have been really heavily involved. So even if your club doesn't populate a summer in those 36, your coaches can go along and observe any of those days, and they'll be marketed through the regional staff. So they might apply to be a skills coach each year, and that's a kind of employed professional role they do on behalf of the region. But they also can just go along and observe part of the day, the whole day, all 3 days, as much as they want to. So it might be that a coach is a bit like, well, actually, yeah, I don't really think I coach backstroke starts particularly well. I could do with going to that Saturday morning. And what we need our clubs and our parents to do is encourage that to happen, all right? We understand that if a coach goes away for a day, it sometimes means that they're not there to coach your child, all right? And we get that. But actually what they're doing is they're going away to learn something that they can bring back to the whole programme. So when we don't see this programme as influencing 36 people, we see it as influencing 36 swimmers at that particular time, but then the coaches that observe or are employed to work on it, they take that message back and it changes the culture of what we do as a sport. So it is really important that if at times, you know, the coach and the committee of your club release a coach to do this stuff, that we encourage it, all right? Actually, if a child is going to be successful, they need to behave as well with an assistant coach they do with their main coach. All right, if they're respectful individuals, they will do that, and we need to encourage that behaviour. But I think ultimately we need our coaches to do this. Coaching can be quite an isolated profession at times. All right, not all of our clubs have a team of coaches to bounce ideas off. Some of those coaches are quite isolated in what they do. So these are opportunities for them to go and meet other coaches and bounce ideas off them, and actually get that knowledge and bring it back and make your clubs better as well. All right, so if they want to observe, open door policy for anyone who wants to come on and have a look. If your child is invited, please attend the parents' workshops, right? Because all those workshops are open for parents as well as the swimmers, because you're going to be the people that help them with nutrition and things. So there's no point in us just telling them. It's important that we talk to you about where you need that support as well. what challenges you're having or what support you need from us, and give you a little bit of information from our nutritional experts. Okay? So hopefully that's helped in some way to talk a little bit about the pathway. As I said, we will put all the resources on the regional website for you to look at later on. This recording of my lovely voice will also be on there. I apologise for that. If you've got any questions that you want to ask now as a group, then fire away. Otherwise, as I said earlier, I'll be here as long as I need to be. My record is 1 hour 30 minutes talking to parents, so I'm all good with that. That's what I'm here for. If you've got any questions, please come and ask. Right, thank you for your time, and hopefully it's cooled you down a little bit anyway for now. Right, thanks guys.
Thank you.